one of the many facets of my obsession is that I have to pair the ink to the pen just right, or for some reason I don't enjoy the pen as much. And so that's led me to be very committed to certain colors because it relates to the color schemes of the pens that I acquire or purchase. Now, recently, a couple things happened, and I decided to go outside my normal color scheme and give green inks a try. And I figured, what better way to share the obsession and the compulsiveness than to make a YouTube video about it? So here we are, and I'm prepared to share this with all of you. So let's check it out right now. I'm Joshua Lax, fountain pen user, collector,
A bit like all of Andrew's, right?
and all-around fanatic. In fact, I'm so obsessed, I started a business where I get to work with other people's pens. But now I want to show you everything I love about the world of fountain pens. From the new pens, to the old pens, the nibs, the ink, the paper, and especially the people. This is Uncapped. I was never really keen on green inks, but recently two things happened that made me rethink my point of view. So the first one was I got this Leonardo pen, and this is the Leonardo, I think it was the Wildflowers series, and it's a Jonathan Brooks material, and I think the model is called Fiordaliso. So the Fiordaliso is this kind of mix of blue, gray, almost black, and green. You can see the greens have different shades. Like, so for example, down here is a little darker, here's a little lighter, and then up here it's even lighter than the other two. Mixed with this kind of like royal blue and this dark gray. Now, I inked this up with kind of a royal blue, and it just wasn't doing much for me. As I said, I had trouble using it because it just wasn't feeling right. So I cleaned it out and I began to think, well, what am I going to fill this with that I might like? And the second thing happened in roughly the same time frame, which was that I watched some Doodlebud videos, and in one of them he spoke about some of the green inks he tried to find the perfect green. And I said to myself, you know what? Maybe that's the solution. The blues I have, obviously the red browns were going to be a little bit odd. I say obviously, to me it's obvious, maybe not to you. But in any event, my feeling was I should check out some green inks to use with this pen. And so that was the second thing that happened. I saw the Doodlebud video, and I think actually it was things he'd never buy again. He was talking about a green ink, and that's what led me to this. The second thing that happened more recent is that I acquired this pen at the San Francisco Pen Show. This is the Galen Leather Leonardo Momento Magico in the Brooks Bohemian Twilight. And again, I looked at the colors and I said, well, you could do something dark or dark gray matching those tones. You could obviously do something orange, but to me, what struck me most, and when I think about this pen, is sort of this tealish green, sort of blue-green tones in it. And I said, well, maybe there's a green ink out there that might work for that. And so that was the catalyst recently for me to want to check out green inks again. To find the right ink to go with these two pens, I looked at some of the inks that I already had on hand. And so here are some swatches that I want to talk to you about. Although not all of them are green, in fact, they're mostly blue, I'll explain to you what my thinking was and why I swatched them for this purpose. So the first here is Hongdian Blackish Green. Pretty much, it's got green in the name, but that's where its connection to the color green stops. If anything, to me, it looks like a blue-black or a teal, and you can even see, like, if you shine a light into the bottle, you can kind of see that it's got a bluish hue, and there's really nothing green about it, but I decided to give it a try because it had green in the name. The second one, Noodler's Audie Leon Murphy Anti-Feather Green. I don't remember when I got this, but it was some years ago. And as you can see, it's kind of a nice green. In fact, it might have worked. The problem with this ink is that it's a Noodler's Anti-Feather, and if you can see, it is extremely dense. It looks like paint. I'm going to take off the cap for you, and you can just see, like, it is, like, I don't even know what to call this. It does not look like any other fountain pen ink that I know of on the market. And you can see just how many solids and dyes and things are in it. I was concerned that it might do something to my brass Kakamori nib, so I used my Sailor Steel Hokuro nib to make this swatch. All the other swatches were done with that brass Kakamori nib. And I did it because it's far less expensive to replace this if this ink did something to this nib. And I know I'm sounding a little bit cautious about it, but I don't know. I didn't want it to start oxidizing. Who knows? So, and I will tell you, it was not easy to get this ink out of this nib compared to everything else I've ever tried in this nib. I actually had to put this in my ultrasonic to get all the ink out because it's just that dense. And I'm frankly afraid to put this in anything other than, I don't even know what, a very inexpensive pen that I don't care about if it starts to get eaten away. Certainly anything with a piston in it, I don't know how it's going to react with the silicone. I don't know. And you can see that there's even dyes that are settled on the bottom, and shaking it doesn't really loosen them up. So this seems like a pretty tough ink, and I was frankly afraid of it. Next we have the Pen BBS 565. And this is actually an ink I received by mistake. I should say correctly, I ordered it by mistake. I meant to order something else. And I received it. It came in this cool little bottle. And the reason I selected it, if you look at it, it's kind of gray looking on camera. It has a very light green appearance in the thinner parts, and then it's greener in the darker parts. But what I don't like about this particular ink color for either of the pens I showed you, although it's kind of interesting, when it writes, it's actually much more like a celery green, and then it dries into this with this much more gray tone, kind of overwhelming it. So for a pen like this here, I don't really think it's a good match, and it's too muted, in my opinion, to match something as brilliant looking as this. What do we have on the bottom here? So first of all, because this, the Bohemian Twilight has this kind of green in it, to me, this looks like what the color of the name of this ink should be, or what the name of this ink is. So this is Stilo Estile Roman Bronze Oxidation, and it's a beautiful color, and I love it. And I thought, I haven't used it in a while, let me check it out for the Bohemian Twilight, especially because this, to me, is a color of bronze oxidation. The problem is that this one just has too much blue in it for it to match, in my opinion, and you may all tell me I'm crazy, but it just doesn't work for me. Just my opinion. So that one's not going to work. Finally, we have Wearing Gold Three Musketeers, another beautiful color, and I'm really excited that it came out. Now, why did I pick this? Because it is a blue. Why did I pick this as a potential candidate to investigate for these two pens? Well, in the marketing photography, this ink is displayed as having green tones. And in fact, in these heavy spots where I really laid it down, you can see that there's like these green tones coming through the blue. And you can even see it a little bit over here. I really like that, and I wanted to kind of experiment with it. But as you can see with the writing part of the swatch, it doesn't really have that much of the green coming through. And so this was, again, an experiment to see how it would match up. But to me, just telling you right now, like, that is an okay color combination. In fact, in the lighting here, like, that could be kind of interesting. But I just know myself, over the long run, I would not necessarily be into this as the ink for either of those two pens I just showed you. In trying to figure out what would be good inks to put in these pens, I tried to think a little bit about what my inspiration was. And one of the things I started with was the Doodlebud video where he said he wouldn't buy certain products again. And one of them that he mentioned was Sherwood Green from Diamine. And you may say to yourself, well, why is this a suitable candidate? First of all, we're going to swatch this in a second. However, let me tell you a little bit about the inspiration. So I saw him inking this, Doodlebud inking this, and I thought, you know, a foresty green might be something cool to go with the floral. And I was also thinking about, well, I may be okay and I may be happy if it's not like a perfect match to the green, but it's something darker. I mean, that is sort of what my inspiration often is with the dark blues, is that you'll have blue parts of a pen, the whole pen might be blue. You may have a pen that's all green. And I always really like the way the dark ink contrasts with a brighter pen. And so I said, well, maybe something that is a bit botanical, but dark as well, might work with a pen that's inspired by flowers and floral designs and floral color schemes as well. The other ink I decided to try, which was totally a lark, was this one. It is Laban Hera Dark Green. Now, what I will tell you is the swatches don't always make sense and the names don't always make sense for these Laban inks based on my research, but it came close, at least in my internet research, to being something that might work with this pen, the Bohemian Twilight. So what I propose to do is swatch these with you in a moment, and then we'll figure out where we're at. What we're going to do is I'm going to swatch each ink on 2 different papers, and then after they're all done, we'll compare them with the pens. The paper we're going to use is Cosmo Air Snow. I tend to use a lot of the true white paper. I like the way ink looks on it, and I really love the Cosmo Air Snow. So, in fact, these swatches were done on the Cosmo Air Snow, and I think it really brings out the colors nicely. However, I use other off-whites, and what I have here is my Tomoe River Pad, and the Tomoe River Pad is the cream color, so you get a little bit of an indication what a off-white looks like. So what we're going to start with is our Sherwood green, and I'm going to swatch it with 2 different instruments. First is going to be my Kakamori brass nib, because it lays down a lot of ink and you can make it darker. And then the second one I'm going to use is the Hokoro nib to get a little bit of a different indication. All right, let us move to the Tomoe. And we should label this, right? Right. So here is the Sailor Hokoro. Let's give it a little more of a dip. And we'll get some gradient there. And then we'll come in with the, needs a little refresh. Come in with the Kakamori. I find when I swatch, I like to kind of write it out until the ink supply depletes, so I can see kind of at all levels of flow where it goes to. We're going to swatch the Hera dark green now. Like I said, I like to kind of see what happens when the ink gets real low. So that was the Kakamori nib, obviously. Let's try the Hokoro. All right, so that is the Cosmo Air Snow. Let's let that dry, and we'll come back to that in a second. Now, let's go back to the Kakamori nib, and we'll do that on the Tomoe. All right, and finally with the Hokuro Fude nib. Get a little more ink on that nib there. See how it comes through. All right, so let's let these dry and then we'll have a look. Here are our ink swatches of the Sherwood Green and Hera Dark Green. And let me tell you what I'm thinking. Let's start first with the Sherwood Green. So hopefully you can see this. The Sherwood Green on the Cosmo Air Snow has some really cool things going on. So it's sort of the inverse of that Three Musketeers, where it's like a darker green, but it has some nice blue tones. And I will confess to you, that is one of the reasons I looked at this ink, because when I was considering whether it would be a good mate for my Leonardo here, I wanted something that might have some blue in it, but was overall like a nice dark green, kind of a leafy green, right? And you could even see that on the Tomoe, you get some nice color contrast and some nice tones coming through. So it's dark, like I said I wanted, but it has some of those blues coming through, particularly like over here where it's dry, but a lot of ink got laid down. And this is a pretty generous nib as well. We'll write with it in a moment, but these gold nibs tend to put down a decent amount of ink. They have a decent amount of flow. So for me, I think that this will be a good match. You can see that with the off-white paper, it's sort of different here, and that's why I did two different ones. But I like kind of the color contrast that's coming through, but also that it's picking up some of those different green tones on the Cosmo Air Snow. And when I say different green tones, I mean some of them, to me, are coming through from paper to pen, but it is dark, so it'll have some contrast to it. So to me, this seems like a good option. Now, again, we are talking about my obsessive nature when it comes to these things. I will say to you, you can think that this is the most despicable ink and pen pairing that ever was, and I totally respect your opinion. Just for me, this is something that's going to work pretty well. So that's the Fiordaliso. Let's take a look at that Bohemian Twilight and the Hera Dark Green. So let me shift things over for you. So as we can see, it's a very different type of green, and you might even say that this is kind of veering into the turquoise department. And that might be why I think actually it's going to work for me and the Bohemian Twilight. So here's the Bohemian Twilight. And you can see that, particularly with the Tomoe River, some of those darker swirls are getting picked up. And it'll have a nice contrast to the dark elements, or not the dark elements, but the darker tones in that gray on the pen. And then on the Cosmo Air Snow, you can see that some of those tones might match up kind of nice. Obviously, we haven't written with a true fountain pen nib. This has all been with two different dip nibs. But that's why I kind of try and vary up what's going on, so you can see thinner, heavier things. But to me, this actually might be closer to what I would think of as that oxidized color. The oxidized color from Stilo Stile is beautiful, but I think it's just too bright. And I'm looking for something that's more muted, and I think that this green may be the one that's going to work. So let's ink these guys up and do a little writing test with each pen and each piece of paper. To save time and avoid the awkwardness of you all watching me fill and then write with these pens, I did it all off camera. So my apologies. in any event, here are the results. So I have the Cosmo Air Snow and the Tomoe in cream, and let's take a look at the pens with them. So as I was saying, this nib is pretty generous in the flow, so you get a pretty heavy line as you're writing, and I kind of like that. I like that in the yellow-ish cream ivory background that's given to the ink on the Tomoe. You get like a true kind of forest green that kind of matches the florals well, and because it's coming out darker, move that down a little, because it's coming out darker, you get some nice contrast. So I'm pretty happy with this pairing. I'm even more happy with the pairing on the Cosmo Air Snow, and like I said, I tend to write with paper this tone as opposed to this tone more often than not. I like that you get some of those blue tones. I like that you get some of the shading with the green, and I like that it's dark in a lot of spots, so you get some contrast with some of the brighter colors in the pen. And then, you know, because that dark kind of blackish gray color in the pen is sort of neutral, it kind of all gels nicely. Let's talk about our Bohemian Twilight. So here is, center everything. Here is the Bohemian Twilight. I'm going to block the Sherwood green in the middle here and move that a little closer. So this pen, I will tell you, as I was writing with it, I'm happy with the matchup, but I don't know how well that comes through for you all on screen, and I'll explain to you why that is. This is an even more generous nib. It's a steel nib than the 14K nib in the other pen. However, you do get the right color. It just, I think on camera it's looking a little flat because it does put down a fair amount of ink. But when you look at it on the Cosmo Air Light, or sorry, the Cosmo Air Snow, you are getting kind of those nice matchups to the kind of, we'll call it tealish green parts of the pen. And same thing here, although this comes through more green, again, because it has that off-white, ivory, yellowy background that is going to change the look and the appearance of the ink on this paper. But because I'm using this more often, I think this is a pretty good matchup. And again, I'm not sure how much you can see it on screen because of just the kind of weight of the ink on the paper and the way the lights are hitting it. You don't necessarily get the same effect that I'm getting with my naked eye. So you'll just have to take it on faith for me that this is the right look for me. Lest you all accuse me of only focusing on fountain pens, let's talk about gel ink. Now I have here 2 packs of G2 refills. It's as you can see, a premium gel refill. My understanding is that ballpoints, obviously they come in green, but for some reason the green ink in ballpoints is usually none too impressive. So, and I personally don't like ballpoints all that much. They're kind of annoying to use, and I have trauma/PTSD from using the erasable ballpoint cartridges when I was like in 4th grade. Anyway, I don't like them you have to press too much, but I do like, when I'm not using fountain pens, some of these gel rollers, whether it's from Parker. Obviously the Pilot ones are great, and we're going to test them out. So I have green ink, it's just called green, and I have Hunter green. Now, I'm actually more excited to see what the Hunter green is like, because you can see based on these color samples here, this is darker. But the one drawback was I could only get that color in the fine point, or the 0.7 millimeter G2 refill. Whereas the plain old green, or whatever you want to call it, just green, came in the bold 1.0 millimeter cartridge or refill, and that's actually what I prefer, so I will track down different colors in that size. Nonetheless, we're going to give both a try. To test our G2 refills, I put them in 2 tactile turn pens. So first, this is the Bolt Action in G10 Navy. It has a very nice kind of matte finish. And then this is the Bolt Action in Blue Ultim. So 2 blue pens. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of blue and green. Usually it's a green pen with blue ink, so I figured why not? Let's try a blue gel roller with green ink cartridges. So this one has the plain green, and this one has the hunter green. This obviously has the bold point, and this has what they call the fine point. So let's start with the G2 in this pen. So this is the Pilot green, bold, and we'll give it a little, I guess you'll call this a rollerball swatch in some degree, right? Maybe a little figure eights. Okay. It is very smooth on this paper, very enjoyable to write with. All right, let's try it on the Tomoe Cream. All right, so there you have that. Let's do a little squiggly swoop there. So that is the Pilot green, and as you can see, it obviously, because it's got this nice white background, this is one of the reasons I like it. The color looks a little more brilliant here. Here it's a little more muted, and it's got that, you know, off-white background, so the greenerness comes through. But overall, I like this green. It's more of a Kelly green, I would say, than the Sherwood Forest ink we were looking at. So, but it overall is nice, and I could see myself using this, you know, although not the darkest ink, it still has a pretty nice look, and I enjoy writing with it in this particular pen. So let's continue on and try the Hunter green. So this is, here, let me, so there you can see that the Hunter green is quite a bit darker than the plain old green or just green. I really like this Hunter green. You know, my preference would be to use the Hunter green rather than the green. However, you know, my preference is always for the bold tip from the G2 rather than the fine. I will say, however, this is writing very nice and wet on both of these papers, and I tested it on printer paper, and the green was a little drier, but the Hunter green was even wetter. So, you know, from my perspective, both of these have a lot of really good attributes that offer them up. You know, obviously there's a little bit of drawback, at least in my mind, you know, the color here, the width of the tip here, but overall, I mean, in some ways I kind of like these in these pens more than I even was thinking about, compared to my inclination or disinclination to fountain pen ink. And what I mean by that is simply that, you know, to me, this seems like much more appealing, both of these, than, you know, even now having tested out some good greens, you know, I feel like I'm more likely to use green G2 refills than I would overall green fountain pen ink. So that is the results of our test with the G2 refills. And that concludes this episode of Uncapped, which was a look at fountain pen and G2 rollerball ink in different greens. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please like and subscribe. Tell the algorithm I'm doing an okay job. And with that, I will see you all very soon on another episode. Thank you so much, and goodbye.